In section 59A, we're going to go over how to divide complex numbers. So the first thing I want to remind you about is that I equals the square root of -1. And then also, I squared equals -1. Two very important things to keep in mind when we're adding, subtracting, and multiplying and dividing. Okay, now, we talked about the complex conjugate a couple days ago, and I mentioned that I would put it in another section. This is the section that I would put it in. But anyway, the complex conjugate of any complex number, a plus bi, is a minus bi. So remember we said we take the opposite of I and write I last. So again, let's go through here. We would just take the opposite of I and write I last. I is already last, so we're just going to say 2 minus 3i. This is just going to be positive 3i, and this is going to be negative 8i. Now, the reason why I skipped this one is because this is the one that students get wrong quite a bit, because they usually just take the opposite of 8 and say it's negative 6i minus 8. But what we have to do is we have to take the opposite of just the I term. So this is going to become positive, and then I just write I last. So this stays negative. So it's negative 8 plus 6i. So be careful on that one. Okay, now, remember that an expression that is simplified cannot have a square root in the denominator. And since I represents the square root of -1, it cannot be in the denominator. So previously, we simplified 5 over the square root of 10 by multiplying the numerator and denominator by the square root of 10. So what we did was we said, okay, we have to get rid of this. So we're going to do 5 square root of 10. And when I multiply by square root of 10 over square root of 10, it's just like multiplying by 1. So we're not changing the value of anything. This is just going to be 5 square roots of 10. And square root of 10 over square root of 10 is just 10, because basically what we're doing is we're taking the square root of 10 and we're squaring it. So we can just erase or cross off the square root and the squaring. Okay, in this section you're going to use the complex conjugate of a number to simplify complex expressions. Okay, so let's look at this right here. This really means that we have negative square root of -1 in the denominator. So what I'm going to do, I am going to multiply by the conjugate. Conjugate here would be positive I. So I'm going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by positive I. And you guys did very well multiplying yesterday. Okay, so this is going to be 3 times I, which is going to be 3i. And then it's going to be 8i times I, so that's going to be plus 8i squared. Now let's go down to the denominator. Negative and a positive becomes negative I squared. All right, now all we need to do is simplify. And remember I told you that I squared is like -1. So anytime you see an I squared, you really just take the opposite of the sign of this number. So this is going to be 3i minus 8. And be careful here, I squared changes to -1. So this is actually going to be positive 1. And now we have to write I last. So we take the sign of the 8 here. So this is going to be -8 plus 3i. Okay, the next one we have is a denominator of 2 minus I. Now we can't just multiply by I, because when I do, I'm going to get the I is going to show up here. So we have to multiply it by its complex conjugate. And then you're going to see what happens when we do that. If we multiply this by 2 plus I, we're going to FOIL here. So this is going to be, I'm going to write it down here just so I have some more room, 6 plus 3i minus 2i, and then minus I squared. All of that's going to go over 4 plus 2i minus 2i, because this is the 4, this is the plus 2i, this is minus 2i, and then it's minus I squared. All right, now let's go back and we'll simplify the numerator here. I squared changes to negative 1. And I'm just going to write this 6, and then we can combine like terms here. So that's going to be plus I, and that's going to just be plus 1 over. Now this is what happens when you multiply by the conjugate. The middle two terms are opposite because this is plus, this is minus, so they go to 0. This I squared changes to, oops, let me just do this part right here, negative 1, and we already have a negative here, so that's actually going to be a plus 1. So we'll have 4 plus 1, and now we're going to simplify. We'll add the 6 and the 1. That will give us 7 plus I over 5. Now remember, you can always, if you think these will reduce, you can always split them up. It would be 7 over 5 plus I over 5, and we can't reduce anymore, so we can leave it like this or like this. Okay, you have a couple of you try-its to do.